Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we have a very cool interview for you. Today I'll be speaking to Mr. Ralf Dieckmann. He was the designer of the Dieckmann P66 .22 caliber sporting pistol. I actually had the chance to take a look at one of these several years ago at the Rock Island Auction House, did a video on it, and when the video published, he actually became aware of it and reached out and invited me to come and speak with him about the pistol itself and also his history in the firearms industry. He was born in Germany in the 1930s, grew up during World War II as a small child in Berlin, and would later emigrate to Canada and then the United States. He has a fantastic story to tell. He's a very cool, very nice guy. And his experience in the firearms industry, I think, is fascinating. I think there's a lot to learn from what he has to say, both on the business side and also on the engineering side. So we're going to talk about his history, his personal history and his development in the firearms industry, and then we're going to take a detailed look at one of his P66 pistols and a bunch of the interesting design elements that it has. So sit back, enjoy, and I present Mr. Ralf Dieckmann.
I became interested in guns when I was 10 years old in post-war Berlin, Germany. There were literally Mausers and rifles and every type of weapon lying around in the streets, including bombs and grenades. And it's natural for boys to pick this stuff up and want to play with it.
Of course. It's been a fantastic environment for a 10-year-old who didn't have to deal with any of the actual repercussions of the war.
I've come across just about every well-known gun, not Winchesters or Colts or anything, but World War II guns, or pre-war civilian guns. When I was about that age, and I used to pick them up and play with them and point them at each other. Some of them may have been loaded, and one day I found a small pocket pistol, and at that time I wouldn't have known what brand it was, but the grips had broken off or burned off, probably rotted if they were wood, and you could see the cartridges in the magazine. The magazine had an oval oblong opening and you could see the verdigris cartridges in there. And that picture, that image, was so fantastic to me as a little boy interested in mechanical things that I picked it up and I wanted to play with it and take it apart, and my buddies threatened to take it away from me and turn it over to the cops, which is what we were taught. And I ran away and threw it into a storm drain in the street with the idea of picking it up later when I got enough muscles to lift that heavy cast iron cover.
Okay.
And after that, knowing that if I showed the guns around, that I found that somebody would try to take them away, I just kept them to myself. And I found Lugers and P38s and Mauser 98s. I even found a Colt Lightning rifle once. At the time, of course, I didn't know what it was. Later on, I recognized that it was a Colt Lightning. So that had to be not a military weapon, but it came out of somebody's collection.
Right.
Found it in a burned-out house someplace. So, and then I started to make wooden pistols, replicas of Colt single actions or 1911 government pistols. The original, my father actually made the first wooden pistol for me. It was just a revolver with no moving parts other than the cylinder. And some bully in the street broke it, and I basically reproduced it by copying my father's pistol, and then until I got the hang of it, and then I started to make my own until they had moving hammers and triggers and semi-automatics where you could pull the wooden slide back.
Nice.
And so they were just mechanical.
Okay.
And the nicest piece I made was a Winchester 1873 lever action rifle. And I always sold my handiwork to other kids for next to nothing. And somebody, hopefully it's still around in Berlin today, has that nice lever action rifle.
Yeah.
And then then as I got older, I decided I wanted to become a gunsmith. And
German laws wouldn't have been particularly conducive to that.
Actually, there would have been jobs available. First of all, I could have gone to Austria or Switzerland as an apprentice.
Okay.
The German-speaking countries, I could have spoken the language. H&K started around at that time. I could have apprenticed for them. And my parents well, nobody around me understood this desire to become a gunsmith after World War II. This kid must be nuts, you know. That's basically, that was the attitude.
Makes sense, yeah.
And my father looked around a little bit to help me, and he couldn't find any gunsmithing jobs, so he enrolled me into a mechanic, a tool making course in Berlin that was run by the city.
Okay.
They paid you a small salary, and I went through 11 months of a preparatory course where you learn to file and drill holes and do all the mechanical work to introduce you to that field.
Okay.
Then during those 11 months you were supposed to look for a job, and which my father couldn't find. He was also ill after World War II. He couldn't put all his energy into it. So so that was not successful. Then he said to me, well, now you're going to become a carpenter. Actually, that's not the way he said it. My father was a architect. He worked for Germany's biggest construction company.
Okay.
And he said, I want you to become an architect, and the prerequisite is you have to have a building trade. You can become a bricklayer, a plumber, or a carpenter. Which do you want? And I said, I want to become a carpenter. I didn't like the mud and, you know, and kneeling all day long. And
I've done brickwork and plumbing. I'd have taken the same choice
yeah.
myself.
So I became a carpenter. I served a 4-year apprenticeship, and my interest in guns didn't go away, so I finally said, well, I'm going to go to Canada. They were actively looking for people with trades. They'd pay you away, find you a place to work, find you a place to live. And
now, it's interesting just to point out that the United States wasn't really a viable option for immigration at that point.
No.
Was far more restrictive than Canada.
Right, you had to have there were 3 ways to get into the United States. You had to have a sponsor, an individual who would vouch for you, or you had to have enough of your own money to do that, or you had to have a job offer from a company, and the only way to get them is if you travel here, and you know, and I didn't have that kind of money, so. Canada actively looked for tradespeople, and as I said, they paid my way. They got me a job in Saskatchewan and a place to live.
Okay.
And then you had to have 2 years to pay that expense back.
Okay.
So in those 2 years, I worked as a carpenter, and then I worked as a part-time gunsmith, and I built a revolver, which is upstairs in my shop. It's a single action revolver the size of a peacemaker, but a .22 Magnum, with a brass frame and a Mossberg .22 caliber barrel, and a steel cylinder, and all the moving parts were steel. I made that, and it just kept going, and I finally said, well, I have to get into guns somehow, so I joined the Canadian Army.
Okay.
And they said I wanted to get into the REMEs. Have you ever heard of that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers.
It's actually RCEME in Canada.
Royal Canadian.
But they call them the REMEs, the same as they do in England.
Okay.
They didn't change the way the name. And so I signed up, and after I signed up, they said, well, you're not a Canadian citizen, and the REMEs, it's a sensitive unit. We can't put you in there. But after you get citizenship, then you can get a transfer. So what do you want? What branch of the Army do you want to pick? So I said, well, I'll pick the artillery, because I knew small arms as well as you could at that age. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know anything about artillery pieces, so that intrigued me. So I joined the artillery, and I learned to fire a 155 howitzer and a 105 howitzer. And then I actually had people who were ready to help me to transfer me to the REMEs once I became a citizen. So toward the end of my 3-year enlistment, I designed and built the original prototype of this pistol. I had to get I had to get an okay from the Queen to pursue this in my own name.
Okay.
And I got a patent on it. And then I wrote to Mossberg, Ruger, and Winchester in the United States to get a job somehow as a gun designer or as a gunsmith. And Mossberg sent me an invitation Nobody else did. Ruger didn't, Winchester didn't. And so on my annual vacation, which is roughly in August, I went from New Brunswick, where I was stationed, down to Connecticut, and stayed in a hotel, and I went to Mossberg the next morning. And when I got there, the place was empty. There's only a guard. And I said, I have an invitation for a job interview. And the guard said to me, well, we're on a vacation shutdown. There's nobody here. They forgot me.
Oh.
So then the guard said, if you want a job in the gun, why don't you go to New Haven? You have Marlin, North Haven, you have Winchester and New Haven. So I went to New Haven, and I had the prototype of my pistol with me in a kind of a zip bag that you use for shaving and toothbrushes and stuff. And I also had my brass revolver in there. I brought that all across the border with me. It was easy in those days.
Right.
And so I went to Winchester, and there was a guard downstairs, and he said, well, we're on a partial shutdown, but there are 2 engineers in engineering. You could talk to them. So I talked to them. I went up there, and I still remember the names. There was Henry Into, who later designed the Security 6 for Ruger, and the other was Harvey Friend. And they looked at my pistol and they said, well, very nice, but we make rifles and we're on a partial shutdown. You'd have to come back when the Human Resources Department is open. But in the meantime, why don't you go and see Bill Ruger? He's never on a shutdown. So I said, well, I wrote him a letter to apply for a job, and I never got an answer. He said, oh, don't go by that, just go down there. So they told me how to get to Southport, and I went to Southport. And the next morning, I went to the factory, Lacey Place. And I'm not making this up, okay? It's very important. So I walked in the morning, I had breakfast, and I walked into the factory, and there were a few steps, and there was a secretary sitting there, right in the center of the lobby. And she was typing as I walked in. And when I walked in, she stopped typing and looked up, and she says, yes, what can I do for you? And I was going to say, my name is Ralf Dieckmann, and I wanted to get a job interview with Bill Ruger. And so I got as far as my name is Ralf Dieckmann. She stopped, looked down on the paper, and said, I'm just sending you an invitation for an interview. That's unbelievable.
Nice.
I still have that letter. She said, wait, and she finished typing it. And she said, Bill Ruger doesn't come in until 9 o'clock. You come back and he'll sign it. And So I went back downtown Southport. Had my hair cut, and went back at 9 o'clock, and he invited me into his office and got hired just like that.
Nice.
And I got that very important sponsorship from him.
Okay.
Since that first hire, he hired me 2 more times himself. I worked for him, and then I didn't become a gun designer quick enough. He said, you have to go through the ranks. You have to do machining, deburring, test firing, everything, assembly, all of which I did. And after 2 years, I wasn't a gun designer yet, so I became impatient and I left. And I went to work for other companies in Connecticut. The second time he hired me, in the meantime, I went to Thompson Center Arms and Mossberg, and from Mossberg I went to H&K in Germany. And then I came back. I learned that you cannot go back. Wherever you're from, you can't go back. So I came back from H&K in Germany and asked Bill Ruger for a job, and he hired me to work in New Hampshire. So there were no job openings, but he hired me. Second time.
You must have made an impression.
Somehow. And I know that he liked me. And then I worked in New Hampshire for 6 years. And I decided I didn't want to retire on the East Coast, and I wanted to retire in New Mexico or Arizona, where all my favorite movies were made. And so my wife and I moved to Arizona, and I lived in Phoenix for 5 years, and then we got divorced. It was a friendly divorce, And my wife worked in human resources. And she said, if you go to Prescott and ask Bill Ruger for your job back, and if he gives it to you, then you get all your seniority back, your profit sharing and vacation and all that stuff. So I went to Prescott, And I took a 50 caliber semi-automatic rifle with me, which I had built in the meantime while living in Phoenix. And I went to his office and asked him to hire me back, and he hired me back. That was the third time. After that, he was too old. But it was kind of iffy as to whether I would get the job. And at one point, he asked me, "What have you been doing in all this time since '98 when you left New Hampshire?" And I said, "Well, I designed a 50 caliber sniper rifle." And his eyebrows went up, and he said, "Oh." I said, and I quickly said, "Would you like to see it?" Because I had it out in my truck. So I brought it in, and I explained it to him how it worked. And it was at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. He was sitting behind his desk, getting drowsy, like many people do at that time of the afternoon. And I said, "I gotta have this job to myself." And I kept racking the breech back to keep him awake, and it worked. So he hired me, and that's how I got to retire from Sturm Ruger in Prescott.
Fantastic. Well, why don't we take a closer look at that pistol?
Okay.
All right. So you told me you made 2 different runs of pre-production prototypes of these. What was the difference?
The difference was you probably know they were made from investment castings. After the very first 2 prototypes, which were purely handmade, I then made investment casting molds. There are 6 castings in these pistols.
Okay.
And so the castings are the same, but between the first model, the first semi-production run and the second production run, I added a hold-open device.
Okay.
That's the main difference. I lowered the magazine release a little bit to be able to put a thumb rest on the grip, and I did some small things, like when you take the firing mechanism apart, there are positive stops where when you turn it back and forth, so you don't have to fiddle with it. And so those are the main differences.
Okay. You want to take that one apart for us?
Okay. First thing, of course, is to remove the magazine, pull the breech block back, make sure it's empty. And then while the hammer is cocked, you just grab the hammer, cock it as far as you can, turn it clockwise, 90 degrees, pull it out.
All right. And the whole hammer assembly comes out as a unit.
Right, and this can actually be taken apart without tools. It's not tedious, but it's a little time consuming, but you don't need any tools at all other than your fingers.
Okay.
Then the next thing is there's a stop pin here which stops the breech block. That is detented by the extension of the return spring assembly.
Okay.
So that it doesn't come out by itself. You just cup your hand under it and pull the return spring assembly forward, and that drops that pin out.
Nice. That's simple and clever.
Right. And actually, before I go further, the reason for this clever invention, clever in quotation marks, is the breech block on this pistol, or the bolt, is designed to come out to the rear. Now, if you look at the return spring assembly and that lug, if this firing mechanism wasn't quick removable, you would have to, from the outside, drive out all the pins and springs and everything in order to get that apart.
Okay.
So I was kind of designed myself into a corner, so I had to design a quick removable firing mechanism that would allow me to field strip the pistol, and that's where that originally came from, that idea.
Okay, that makes sense.
Then to get the grip off, you need a 25-cent piece or a screwdriver, but I made it for $0.25. Then you have to depress the magazine release to get it below the wooden grip. Like that. That usually breaks my fingernail. And you can take the safety out without much of a problem.
Now, you had mentioned to me that you specifically took that safety mechanism from an existing gun.
Yes, the high standard HD military pistol. It had a safety that blocked the sear, as it should. but the safety also disconnected the trigger bar from the sear, so that if you're a brute and you lean on the trigger, thinking why isn't the gun firing, you would not break the trigger bar.
Okay.
So that you just get an empty pull. Now that always intrigued me. Now the pistol, the next feature is the barrel is held in by what's called a differential thread.
And this is a really clever element.
There's the barrel, of course, and the receiver, and there's an intermediate nut which has a thread on the outside and on the inside. And the thread differences, the pitch differences between the barrel thread and the barrel nut thread is about 0.02 of an inch, which gives you a tremendous mechanical advantage. So you have a special wrench that you insert into the back of the receiver, and it engages the barrel nut, and then you turn the wrench clockwise.
So that mechanical advantage is in there so that you can just hand tighten the barrel
Right. You don't
in place.
You don't need special tools other than this wrench. But the worst part in taking barrels apart, you have to have aluminum jaws
Right.
to hold the receiver and the barrel. You don't need this. You can do this in your hand while you're watching TV. You take the barrel out, and the barrel nut is the separate part on there.
Very nice. Now you, how long is that barrel?
4 5/8 of an inch.
That's a pretty specific barrel length.
Well, when I first worked for Ruger, his standard model had a 4 5/8 inch barrel, and and the reason, of course, I designed the pistol the way it is in order to increase the barrel length without increasing the overall length of the pistol.
Okay.
And if I make this pistol with a 7-inch barrel, then it looks like a Ruger standard or a high standard or a Cold Woodsman, and you really can't tell the difference. But I made the snub nose model to get people to comment and say, well, look at that short barrel, you know, what good is that? And then I would show them, well, no, it's not short, it's a 4 5/8 inch barrel. So if I turn the barrel around and like this, the amount of barrel that is now inside the receiver is what is normally inside the receiver on a regular pistol.
Right.
And the other part is sticking out on the outside. So this would actually make it look more common. But by turning that around, so I made a 4 5/8 inch barrel to demonstrate that huge difference of barrel length increase.
Okay. Can you point out to us how the magazine makes that possible? We kind of glossed over that at the beginning. You know, normally you
Right.
have the magazine coming up through the grip.
Right. I'm going to stick the grip on here just temporarily. Normally in a 22 or any kind of pistol, the magazine follows the grip angle, and the front of the magazine would be roughly an inch behind the front of the receiver. And so if you want to extend the barrel into the pistol, you're kind of forced to enter the magazine into the front strap in order to put the top of the magazine behind the barrel for proper feeding.
Okay.
But a straight magazine wouldn't allow you to do that, so I had to make the magazine curved, which of course is a natural thing to do for rimmed cartridges.
Right.
So this really is only good for 22s, or there's some new cartridges on the market that are rimfire cartridges where it would work.
Okay. Yeah, the 17.
But it doesn't work with a 9mm Luger or 45 ACP. It works with a rimmed cartridge.
Right.
And I was in my early 20s when I designed that, and I simply didn't think I knew enough to dare to build a 45 or a 9mm. 22s I felt were safe, even though they're quite high pressure cartridges.
Right.
And so I decided to design the pistol with the magazine going into the front of the grip, so that it would be behind the barrel. And a neat side effect is that when you hold the pistol in your hand, your fingers cover the magazine. There have been instances where people didn't insert the magazine properly. They fire the pistol and the magazine drops on the ground, which can't happen with this pistol.
That's true, yeah.
However, an engineer at High Standard, when I showed it to them back in the 60s, said that a pistol shooter wouldn't constantly want to open his hand to change magazines. And I think that's possibly true for target shooters, not so much for self-defense shooting.
That's true. Yeah, they want to get one grip and maintain it, but still.
I've fired this pistol thousands of times, and it just never seemed to be a problem that I had to open my hand to do that.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think it would be. Cool. So you said there were 2 different production or pre-production series. There were only, I think you said 4 of each of those?
After the first 2 handmade ones, I made 4 production models that didn't have the hold open.
Mm-hmm.
And then I made 4 more pre-production. I called them PM. This is a PM5, production model 5.
Okay.
Prototype. And so there were 4 more of those. So all in all, there were the first 2 handmade ones, and then a total of 8, 4 and 4.
Okay. And it sounds like it was really pretty much just didn't quite have luck of the draw that these didn't go into full-scale production.
People would ask me. I contacted so many people. Of course, I offered to Bill Ruger, and he said to me, "The world really doesn't need another .22 caliber pistol."
It certainly would have directly competed with what he was already
Well, that's
making.
what I didn't understand. I've always been a dreamer. I design things that I like, and it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody else likes it. I was never a professional inventor to look at the marketplace and see what is needed and then invent that. That wouldn't have been any fun to me.
Okay.
It's too commercial. So then I approached Browning, and that was the only company actually that told me what I needed to know. And they said, "We have a perfectly nice pistol, and even though yours may be better than ours, if we make your pistol, all of our advertising will have been for nothing. The tooling we built will have been for nothing. All the marketing efforts." That was the only company that actually told me what I was up against. So then I realized, well, I have to find people who want to be in the pistol business and aren't making guns, or rifle manufacturers. And I almost made it with Mossberg. Mossberg had they had a division called the AIG division of OF Mossberg, where they made handguns.
Okay.
They made a little double-action revolver designed by a gentleman from New Jersey. They had a big revolver they called the Abilene, I think. And they hired me. They actually hired me away from Thompson Center Arms to specifically make my pistol.
Huh.
And that was right after the American Handgunner published an article on this pistol. The minute that article came out, I got a call from Alan Mossberg, and he hired me. And I would have not normally have given up the job at Thompson Center, because Warren Center wanted to retire, and he wanted me to be his chief engineer.
Oh, wow.
So I had a really good future ahead of me.
Yeah.
But I also wanted to make my own pistol.
It had to be very exciting to have
Right.
the potential to actually put this into production.
So O.F. Mossberg hired me. They wanted me to come along with the pistol. And they made an effort, but then they decided to get out of the handgun business, and nothing ever came of it.
Okay.
But it was called the AIG division of O.F. Mossberg.
Huh. Okay.
And I've tried with a lot of private people. One of the people that actually put $12,000 into this pistol, all of which went for castings and parts and nothing for salaries. His name was Matthew Mazer, and he was a polisher at Sturm Ruger. And he passed away since then. And people wanted business plans from me. I didn't even know what a business plan was.
It doesn't sound nearly as interesting as designing guns.
No. And now that I'm older, of course, I realized I should have had a team. I should have done the designing. I should have had other people help me, business people, to get that off the ground. But that's the way it goes, And I'm not sorry. I had a lot of fun.
Good.
Actually, the main reason I contacted you is because considering what the other two sold for, I don't have any fear that I have to give this away. But my main reason was to have you tape this and take a look at it before it's gone. Once a collector has it, you have to wait a whole generation before it comes back on the market.
That's very true.
So I wanted you to have the chance to have access to the pistol.
Well, I certainly appreciate it, and I'm sure everyone else out there watching does too, because even if I can get my hands on one, that doesn't do any good for anyone else unless we
Right.
go ahead and record something so everyone else can understand it. Thank you very much for
You're
taking the
welcome.
time.